Hello, I'm Martin Haese. I'm the Chair of the Premier's Climate Change Council and I'm also the CEO of Business SA, the Chamber of Commerce and Industry here in South Australia. First and foremost, I acknowledge that we're meeting on Kaurna land and I pay respect to elders past, present and emerging. We are at a precipice. We are on a cusp. When it comes to climate change and its impact on South Australia, Australia and beyond, we are at a precipice. And we either get this right or we get this wrong. Now let's look at South Australia's natural splendour. Let's look at the value of our natural environment. South Australia prides itself on being a deeply livable place. Adelaide, in fact, is one of the most livable cities in the world. So what is the relationship between livability and biodiversity? Well, they're both intrinsically linked. In my former role, when I was the Lord Mayor of Adelaide, I was very focused on urban biodiversity, urban green tree canopy covers, to ensure that the urban heat island effect cooled our city. And of course, our wonderful parklands in Adelaide are an absolute blessing, because over 900 hectares of parks and parklands right around our city cool our city in the heat of summer by about 3 degrees. That was an important lesson for me, and it's an important lesson in terms of the impact on human health, which I'll also talk about shortly. Our relationship with our natural environment right across South Australia is absolutely critical. And if the 2019-2020 bushfire season taught us anything, it tells us that our climate is changing. It also tells us that if we're not kind to our climate will be agnostic with us. So in 2020, I think there's a whole new level of consciousness about our relationship with biodiversity, our relationship with our natural environment across South Australia. I think that started many years ago. I think that was exacerbated with the bushfire season last summer, and I think that continues with COVID-19. Many South Australians are actually spending more time in the natural environment this year, possibly this year more than many other years in the past. So our relationship with our natural environment and the biodiversity within it, I think, is only lifting in terms of its gravitas amongst all of us. In many ways, that's a very positive thing, and in many ways, that could even be seen as a positive outcome of 2020, which of course, for all of us, has been a very uncertain and a very disruptive year. But at some point in time, we need to look beyond COVID and begin to imagine what our city, what our state, what our place is going to be in the future. And biodiversity, the rich biodiversity right around South Australia, is a very important part of the sustainability of South Australia and how we address climate change through mitigation, through adaptation, through cooling, through reducing carbon emissions and possibly even sequestration are all incredibly important, because these things strike to the sustainability and the livability of our city and our state. The agricultural sector across South Australia has always been profoundly important, whether it's from a food production perspective, whether it's from an export perspective, whether it's from a tourism perspective, or whether it's just the natural splendour of nature in South Australia. South Australia is spectacular. Ask anyone who comes into South Australia from abroad and they'll tell you something that we already know. It's a beautiful place, but it's a beautiful place that needs to be protected. And driving down carbon emissions, which ultimately is the measure of success for our state, is fundamentally important. And our carbon emissions come from various sources. They come from our energy grid. And as you know, South Australia has done very well, at least for a decade, if not more, in terms of reducing carbon emissions. In fact, we have a goal as a state to achieve net zero carbon emissions by 2050. And we have an interim aspiration by 2030 to reduce carbon emissions by 50% based upon 2005 levels. But carbon also comes from transport networks, from commercial buildings through the air conditioning systems, also comes from the waste cycle. There are various means by which carbon is emitted into the atmosphere. So we've got to reduce carbon emissions, and in some instances also we need to sequester them, we need to absorb them. And Premier's Climate Change Council last year worked on a blue carbon strategy. And that's all about harnessing coastal environments, mangroves, coastal seagrasses, in terms of their ability to sequester carbon out of the atmosphere, to drive those emissions down. So like many endeavours, we can't exclusively rely on doing one thing. We need to have a blue carbon strategy. We need to be very conscious of driving down our emissions from the transport sector. We need to continue to embrace renewable energy sources. And hydrogen is a great example of something which is emerging on the horizon for South Australia. We do very well with wind and solar and battery technologies, all important in terms of reducing carbon emissions. But there are many other ways we can do it too. And the circular economy is a wonderful opportunity in the future for South Australia. And if we want to be an environmental leader, if we want to protect our biodiversity across our state, we've got to be focused on driving down carbon emissions. Now, natural habitats. We're also blessed in South Australia with an abundance of national parks and state parks, places that you and I enjoy, but places that are also designed to protect biodiversity. That's very, very important. There's always a tension between the protection of natural splendour, the protection of biodiversity, and sometimes economic development. And that's why at the Premier's Climate Change Council, we're very focused on what we call the low emissions economy, which is stimulating demand and stimulating investment activity and stimulating employment in the right sectors, in sectors which are sustainable, sectors which protect our environment but build our economy simultaneously. And this is all achievable. And this is the exciting part of this equation, is that due to new technologies, due to new policies, due to government leadership, due to industry leadership, due to industry investment, is that building a low carbon economy is an extraordinary opportunity for our state to not only be a national leader, but also to be a world leader. And if we can achieve that, because we live in a state which is already decoupled, which we can demonstrate that our carbon emissions have been reducing over recent years, we can also demonstrate that our gross state product, which is a measure of economic activity, is continuing to go up. That's what everybody's looking for. South Australia has already achieved that, but there's no room and there's no reason for complacency. We must stay the course, if not accelerate the course. And the measure of success will be the protection of our natural splendour, the protection of our biodiversity and natural habitats for flora and fauna right around South Australia. And the benefits are multifold, because sectors like ecotourism will flourish in South Australia when we get this right. And we are making so many steps towards doing that now. We must stay the course. We must continue to do more. Conversely, if we get this wrong, what are the impacts? Well, the biggest impact is not only on the natural environment. It's not only the threat to the biodiversity ecosystems in South Australia, there's also a concurrent threat to human health. And the Premier's Climate Change Council works with many groups, including Doctors for the Environment, the Australian Medical Association. We talk and listen and consult with a lot of bodies to learn about what could be the impacts, not only on biodiversity, but also on human health if we get this wrong. And many of the other speakers today will share some insight into this. So we need to remain focused to ensure that we protect what we value and we meanwhile continue to grow our economy. And it is achievable. Both are achievable. These things are not mutually exclusive. Both can be achieved. And if we get this right, we will be one of the first states, one of the first places in the world that can be held up as an exemplar. And many people will come to us, many jurisdictions will come to us to learn how we got it right, how we did it and how we did it first. And in many ways, that will actually enhance the prosperity of South Australia. We'll have more people coming to see our wonderful state. We'll also be able to increase our exports. Our agricultural sector, like I shared before, is absolutely critical. It's a critical economic contributor, but also in terms of protecting our environment as a result of some of the innovation that's happening in agricultural processes, like organic soil farming, and these emerging new technologies and these new ideas and these creative approaches will also protect our environment, retain water in our soils, slow down the erosion processes, but simultaneously also increase cropping yields. So we are an industrious state. We're an inventive state. We're a state and we're a people who absolutely value our natural environment. So we must. And at the same time, we can also enjoy a growing economy. Thank you, everyone. Greatly appreciate it. Bye now.